Hey boys, it's HarmNone. Today, I'm ranking all of the drift cars in GTA Online again. Now the reason that I'm making this video for like the third time in a year is because we've got some new drift cars into GTA Online with yesterday's update week. Now these were actually slated to be released with the Agents of Sabotage DLC, and we got them as drip feed. Shocking, I know. The new vehicles are the Dinka Jester Classic, the Rune Chebarek, and the Karen Futo, which is widely regarded as the OG drift car in GTA Online. Naturally, I was curious how they stacked up to the rest of the cars, so I decided to make a video on it and compare them with all of the other drift tunable cars in GTA Online. So that's what this video is about. Leave a like if you enjoy, dislike if you don't, consider subscribing if you're new. Let's go ahead and get started with number 15. And at number 15, we have the Declassy Drift Yosemite for $981,000 to $1,308,000 if you don't have the trade price. The Drift Yosemite yet again remains as the worst of all the drift tunable vehicles in GTA Online. And the biggest issue that I have with it is due to the size of the vehicle. Unfortunately, not being able to squeeze between vehicles in the streets of Los Santos is a relatively large issue when it comes to drifting in free mode. Even still though, in drift races you will face issues with this vehicle because of how big the vehicle is. It's very unfortunate, but this vehicle simply doesn't have a chance versus the rest of the vehicles with drift tuning available for them in the game. Next up at number 14, we got the Volkart Nebula Turbo for $797,000. And the Nebula Turbo has been one of the more drifting-oriented vehicles in GTA Online over the course of the years that it has been in the game. And then they added the actual drift tuning to it. But unfortunately, I think it is pretty easily one of the worst drift tunable cars in GTA Online. Something with the steering just feels off to me. It also doesn't feel like it has enough grip in the rear, which seems odd for a drift car, but it doesn't feel right. I think comparatively to the other cars, it's also quite boring, which doesn't really help its case at all. Despite being one of the cheaper drift tunable cars, I do think this is one to stay away from. Next up, we got the Annis Euros at number 13 for $1,350,000 to $1,800,000, which is crazy expensive for what this car is. The Annis Euros, as I said, the last time that I ranked the drift cars and the time before that, has always disappointed me. I still feel that disappointment even with the drift tuning applied to the car. Now don't get me wrong, it is miles better than the Volkart Nebula Turbo that is ranked behind it, but it is still nowhere near as good as the other cars ahead of it on this list. It's sad, but unfortunately it's just true. The Annis Euros has always been a disappointment, and I think unfortunately it will continue to disappoint players like myself for the rest of GTA Online's lifespan. Next up, we got the Drift Tampa for $995,000. And when I drove the Drift Tampa for the first time with the drift tuning applied to it all the way back when it first came out, I was extremely disappointed. However, I am happy to report that this vehicle is miles better than the Annis Euros. The biggest problem though that I have with this vehicle is still the same as the first time that I ranked it, and that is simply due to the size of the vehicle. Same with the Drift Yosemite, this is just a really big car, and for drifting, it's not ideal to have such a large vehicle, at least in free mode. Now, you will hit cars and other objects a lot with this vehicle because of the size, but it is still very good. The size will be an issue though, so keep that in mind. I would say you should probably hold off on buying this car to get the drift tuning on it and get something ahead of it on the list, because I just feel like you're probably going to find more success with the vehicles coming up ahead on the list. At number 11, we got the Annis Remus for $1,027,500 to $1,370,000. And the Remus is an absolutely awesome car in GTA Online, and with the drift tuning applied, it is quite good. The biggest issue with this car for me lies with the front end grip. I feel like it has a lot, which can be a good thing, but it can also be bad. I also think that this car does feel extremely long when you're drifting it, and the back end will often hit things on the side of the road, like lampposts, pedestrians, things like that. Now, it's an awesome car regardless, and I think that you should have an Annis Remus in GTA Online. I just think that maybe you should put the drift tuning on a different car if you really want to go drifting, particularly in free mode. At number 10, we got one that's probably going to surprise a lot of people, and that's the Dinka Jester RR for $1,477,500 with the trade price to $1,970,000 without the trade price. The Dinka Jester RR is one of the first batch of cars that had the drift tuning added to them when it first came out, and I ranked it at number 4 when it initially released. I still think it is just as good of a car as when I initially ranked it. However, we have had some really good cars come out with the last updates that have simply knocked the Dinka Jester RR down a few places. The RR is a really good car and it has a really good balance for drifting, while also being a relatively small vehicle, and it has pretty good power. I still think though that this car is one of the best drift cars in the game, but unfortunately it just doesn't keep up with some of the newer cars, in my eyes at least. And the other issue that I do have with the Dink Adjuster RR is the price in comparison to some of the cars ahead of it on the list is quite expensive. This is the most expensive car on the entire list, and I don't really feel like you're getting the full value of the car in the drifting performance. At number 9, we got the Ubermacht Sentinel Classic Widebody. This is going to cost you $650,000 plus an additional $700,000 to get the widebody kit on the Ubermacht Sentinel Classic. This is one of the newer drift tunable cars in GTA Online, and I stand by what I said the last time that I ranked the drift tunable cars, and that was that the Sentinel Classic Widebody is just slightly mildly better than the Dink Adjuster RR, and especially for how much less that it actually costs. It has all the same great handling while being in a slightly smaller and lighter package, which does help a lot when it comes to drifting, at least in my opinion. The Sentinel Classic Widebody definitely deserved to get drift tuning as an available upgrade for it, and I'm very glad to see that it has it. And I know a lot of you are probably going to be pissed that this thing is ahead of the Dink Adjuster RR, but honestly I do feel like this thing is just simply better. At number 8, we got one of the new cars, and this is of course the Rune Chabarek for $145,000. And this is among the 3 newest cars to receive drift tuning as an upgrade option in GTA Online, and it was a real toss-up for me as to where to put this vehicle, so I settled on the middle of the pack. I don't want you to think that this means that this is a bad car though. It is actually exceptionally good. The only issue that I have with the car, which is also its biggest strength, is the fact that it is extremely slow. Now this means that you won't get a lot of super high action and intense drifting, but what you will get is an extremely easy car to drift with. The reason it's so easy is because A, it is a tiny vehicle, but B, it's so slow that you cannot possibly crash this thing. It's so slow. You can correct any mistakes that you make before crashing. You really can't mess it up. This car is an absolute riot to drive, and it's super cheap. The only reason that I put it on the middle of the list is because it takes absolutely no skill to drive, which you could argue actually makes it a much better car. I think that on a list like this though, if I put this car at number 1, I'm getting destroyed in the comment section. So that's why I'm putting it middle of the pack, but I truly do feel like this is one of the very best drift cars in the entire game, especially for the money. At number 7, we got the Dink Adjuster Classic for $790,000, and much to my surprise, the Jester Classic actually makes a really good drift car, and I fully enjoyed driving and drifting it around. The Jester Classic is a car that I've always been very critical of in GTA Online, largely due to the engine resistance that the car has, which makes it accelerate slower and have a worse top speed and just generally perform worse. However, with the drift tuning applied, I didn't even think of it or notice it once while I was driving it. The Jester Classic was fun, it's relatively cheap to purchase, it has a lot of customization, it's good looking. I think it's a great drift car and that you should probably buy one and try it out for yourselves. This thing's a riot. Definitely give it a shot. Next up, we got the Fathom FR36 for $1,610,000. And I think as far as actual drift racing goes, the FR36 is one of the very best cars to use, if not the best car to use, if you want to try and win the drift racing. However, when it comes to free mode drifting, I do feel like there are quite a number of cars that are superior to the FR36. Now, that's not saying this thing is bad, it drifts just fine, nearly as good as any other car, but unfortunately, it kind of lacks in customization, at least in my opinion, and I do feel like it is kind of boring compared to a lot of the other drift tunable cars that we have in GTA Online now. Still, it's an awesome vehicle and I would encourage you to buy one, just not as much as some of the other cars that are ahead of it on this list. At number 5, we got the Ubermacht Cypher for $1,162,500 to $1,550,000 if you don't have the trade price. Now, out of the 3 drift tunable vehicles that were released with the Bottom Dollar Bounties DLC, I think the Cypher is pretty easily the best out of them all. It feels absolutely awesome to drive without drift tuning, and it feels naturally very good with drift tuning applied to it, especially compared to the Sentinel Classic Widebody and the Nebula Turbo, which are both significantly worse to drive with or without the drift tuning applied to them. The Cypher also has great customization due to it being released with the Tuners DLC, and it's also on sale the week that this video is going out, so if you're watching this shortly after it comes out, I would recommend picking up the Cypher if it interests you. At number 4, we got the Annis ZR350 for $1,211,750 to $1,615,000 if you don't have the trade price. The 350 is still one of the best drift cars in GTA Online despite being one of the earliest to receive the drift tuning upgrade. It feels good and it isn't too big or bulky when driving or drifting around on the often crowded streets in the city. The customization options for the car are absolutely excellent too, and I do think that this is truly one of the very best drift cars in the entire game. At number 2, we got the Karen Futo GTX for $1,192,500 to $1,590,000 if you don't have the trade price. The GTX is an awesome drift car in GTA Online, and I feel like the main reason it's so good is because of just how easy it is, but it does have a little bit of skill that you can gain with the car to be that much better. I think the car being on the very small side helps a lot to be able to avoid pedestrians, vehicles, and other objects that might get in the way of drifting in GTA Online, at least in free mode. The GTX also has some great customization and is also quite notable due to its appearance in Initial D. Now, I haven't seen it, but people seem to love it largely because of that. Overall, the GTX is awesome. But moving on to number 2, we have the Karen Futo for $9,000. The Karen Futo basically feels the exact same as the Karen Futo GTX. It just costs over $1 million less if you are going off the trade price. And if you count the non-trade price, it costs over $1.5 million less than the GTX, while being just as small and nimble with the same responsiveness, and it is just as fast feeling. The only thing that the GTX does better than the regular Futo is in the customization. The Futo though is definitely way better value-wise, and it is the best drift tunable car in GTA Online now, at least in terms of value. This thing is by far the cheapest drift tunable car in the entire game. At number 1, we have the Benefactor Vorschlaghammer for $1,790,000. I previously put the Vorschlaghammer on the list as my number 1 drift tunable car in GTA Online, and nothing has changed to make me want to switch its positioning. I feel like the Hammer is pretty easily the most consistent at drifting. Despite being much larger than the Karen Futo GTX and Karen Futo, I don't feel like I run into the issues of hitting other vehicles on the streets of Los Santos when I'm driving this thing nearly as much as some of the other cars that we've talked about on this list today. The Vorschlaghammer is an awesome car. It's got great customization, looks great, sounds great. It is definitely the number 1 drift car in GTA Online in my opinion, but there is a case to be made for the Karen Futo as being the best, just simply due to the fact of how cheap the vehicle is, especially comparatively to this thing, which is the second most expensive vehicle on the list. So anyway guys, there you have it. That is my official ranking of every drift tunable car in GTA Online as of February 6th, 2025. If you enjoyed the video, if you learned something, leave a like, if not dislike. Of course, consider subscribing to my channel if you guys are new. Comment a 7 if you made it to the end of the video, and let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, take care. Peace.